You don't need to raise your vibration. You need to admit you're stuck. That word you keep repeating, higher, is not about peace. It's about escape. You feel heavy, irritated, distracted, pulled back into the same emotional cycles. You try meditation. You try positive thinking. You try discipline for 3 days, and then something pulls you down again. Same triggers, same reactions, same invisible ceiling. And what's worse is this. You know you're capable of more. That's the quiet pain, not failure, not chaos. Potential, untouched potential rots. And when it rots, it turns into resentment toward yourself, toward other people, toward life. You call it low energy. You call it bad luck. You call it burnout. But it's something more dangerous. It's internal contradiction. You want elevation, but you refuse subtraction. You want clarity, but you protect the habits that keep you foggy. You want power, but you cling to identities that make you small. This is the part nobody tells you when they talk about vibrating higher. They sell you addition, add gratitude, add rituals, add routines, add books, add supplements, add affirmations. Carl Jung saw through this immediately. He watched people decorate their egos with spiritual language while staying psychologically unchanged. He saw men who talked about consciousness but avoided confrontation. Men who spoke about alignment but couldn't sit alone with their own thoughts for 10 minutes without reaching for distraction. He noticed something brutal. Most people trying to elevate are protecting the very structures that keep them low. You don't rise by stacking new behaviors on top of a fractured identity. You rise by dismantling what's false, and that dismantling feels like loss. Here's the tension you're feeling right now. If raising your vibration requires giving something up, something familiar, are you actually willing to do it? Or do you just want the feeling of growth without the cost of change? Be honest, because this isn't about spirituality, it's about structure. Your nervous system is trained around certain patterns. Your identity is reinforced by certain roles. Your relationships reward specific versions of you. You have built an ecosystem around who you currently are. If you elevate, that ecosystem destabilizes. Some people won't recognize you. Some dynamics will break. Some comforts will disappear. That's why most men stay exactly where they are while pretending they're evolving. They don't want to lose access to approval. They don't want to lose the identity that makes them predictable. They don't want to lose the familiar emotional script, even if it keeps them small. So they say they want to vibrate higher, but what they really want is to feel superior without surrendering control. There are 5 things Jung identified that block real elevation. Not symbolic obstacles, psychological anchors, and every one of them is tied to your ego's survival strategy. You won't release them casually. You won't release them comfortably. And if you're not careful, you'll defend them while claiming you want transformation. This is where most people click away, because the next step isn't inspiration. It's confrontation. If you're still here, it means part of you knows something is suffocating your growth. If this level of thinking is rare where you are, subscribe. Not for motivation, for precision. Because in the next step, we're not adding anything to your life. We're identifying what must die. And once you see it, you won't be able to unsee it. What's happening to you is not low vibration. It's ego preservation. You are not blocked. You are defended. There is a difference. When a man says he wants to grow but keeps repeating the same cycles, Jung would not ask about his goals. He would examine his defenses, because the psyche does not resist evolution without reason. It resists threat. And elevation is a threat. The first defense is subtle. You protect the image of yourself as a good person, responsible, reasonable, mature, spiritually aware. You have built a persona that earns approval. It keeps conflict minimal. It keeps rejection controlled. It keeps you safe. But safety is not elevation. When your decisions are filtered through, how will this make me look? You are operating from fear. Fear of being judged. Fear of being misunderstood. Fear of being disliked. That is not high frequency. That is social survival. The second pattern is emotional fatigue disguised as growth. You consume content. You reflect. You analyze. You understand your trauma. You understand your patterns. You can articulate your wounds with precision, but you are tired because insight without execution drains the nervous system. You are carrying awareness without structural change. That creates internal friction. You know more than you act on. That gap erodes self-respect, and self-respect is the foundation of power. The third pattern is identity fragmentation. One version of you wants discipline, another wants comfort, one wants dominance, another wants validation, one wants solitude, another fears invisibility. So you oscillate. You make promises at night and break them in the morning. You feel strong in isolation and weak in social environments. You speak about standards, but tolerate what violates them. This internal contradiction lowers your psychological frequency more than any external circumstance. Then comes strategic withdrawal. You tell yourself you're protecting your energy. You say you're selective. You say you're focused. But often you're retreating because engagement exposes weakness. Visibility risks failure. Leadership invites criticism, so you reduce your presence. You scroll instead of act. You observe instead of initiate. You prepare instead of execute. Over time, invisibility becomes your comfort zone, and invisibility breeds irrelevance. This is the quiet fear most men won't articulate. Being replaceable, being unnoticed, being average. So instead of risking visible growth, you manage your image and call it self-development. Jung saw this repeatedly. People constructing identities around potential rather than performance, around intention rather than embodiment. And the psyche knows the truth. That's why you feel restless, irritated, slightly behind your own capacity. You are not failing because you lack knowledge. You are stuck because you are protecting structures that once kept you safe, but now keep you small. Here is the partial revelation. Every defense you built had a purpose. It prevented pain. It secured belonging. It minimized threat. But what once preserved you is now suffocating you. Elevation requires betrayal. You must betray the identity that kept you socially acceptable. You must betray the comfort that kept you emotionally regulated. You must betray the narratives that excuse your stagnation. This is where most men hesitate. Because without the persona, without the role, without the familiar defenses, who are you? If you're serious about this level of reconstruction, subscribe, not casually, deliberately. Because this conversation is not for men seeking comfort. It is for men prepared to dismantle what protects them. In the next phase, we confront something harder. What happens when the old version of you begins to collapse and you don't yet know who replaces him? That's where real instability begins. The old model of you is failing on purpose, not because you're broken, because it's obsolete. You've been trying to stabilize an identity that no longer matches your internal capacity. That's why the usual fixes stopped working. The routines, the discipline bursts, the motivation spikes. They don't hold because they're built on a structure that's already cracking. This is the part most men misinterpret. They think the emptiness means depression. They think the withdrawal means weakness. They think the silence means they're losing themselves. But Jung would recognize it as something else, a controlled collapse. The psyche does this when a persona has been overused, when you've played a role for too long, when you've performed competence, calm, strength, goodness, spirituality, whatever mask you rely on, and the cost finally exceeds the benefit. So your system starts shutting down what is false. You lose interest in conversations you used to tolerate. You feel irritated by people you used to appease. You stop enjoying distractions that used to numb you. You become less social, less available, less willing to explain yourself. It feels like you're becoming colder. What's actually happening is you're becoming less programmable. Old pleasures stop working because they were never pleasures. They were anesthesia. Old connections start fading because they were not bonds. They were contracts. You provide a version of yourself. They reward you with acceptance. Now you're no longer willing to pay. So the identity collapses. And this is where it gets dangerous. Because if you rebuild incorrectly, you don't elevate. You harden. A man in collapse can take two paths. One is restructuring. The other is decay. Restructuring looks like solitude with intent, silence with precision, removal of noise, tightening boundaries, building a more coherent self from the inside out. Decay looks similar at first. Same isolation, same quiet, same withdrawal. But decay has no structure. It becomes avoidance dressed up as depth. It becomes bitterness disguised as standards. It becomes, I'm protecting my energy, when you're really protecting your ego from exposure. The difference is simple. In restructuring, you are becoming harder to manipulate, but easier to respect. In decay, you are becoming harder to reach and easier to ignore. That's the real fear. Not loneliness, irrelevance. A man can survive being alone. He cannot survive being unnecessary. So your mind is scanning for meaning, for direction, for something solid to build on. And if you don't give it a structure, it will default to the easiest substitute: identity through resentment, identity through superiority, identity through detachment. That is not high vibration. That is emotional armor, and armor is heavy. This phase is where men either become precise or become performative. They start posting quotes. They start talking about growth. They start using Jung as an aesthetic. They start adopting a new persona: the awakened man, the stoic man, the unbothered man, just another mask. If you want to elevate, you have to resist the temptation to replace the old persona with a shinier one. You need something rarer, a self that does not depend on being seen. So here's a quiet checkpoint. Comment the city you're watching from. I want to see where men are going through this quietly, not for engagement, for pattern recognition. Because this collapse is happening everywhere, and most men think it's only happening to them. Now, the pressure you're feeling is unresolved for a reason. You're losing the old version of yourself, but you haven't earned the new one yet. And in that gap, your mind will beg you to go back to what's familiar. Old habits, old people, old distractions, old identities. In the next chapter, we cut through the most seductive lie men tell themselves in this gap, that something outside them is the cause. Because the moment you blame the external, your collapse stops being restructuring and starts being decay. Here is the lie that will destroy this entire reconstruction process if you let it survive. It's happening because of them. Because of the market, because of women, because of your parents, because of the economy, because nobody recognizes real value anymore. External blame feels intelligent. It feels analytical. It feels justified. It is also the fastest way to decay. When you locate the cause of your stagnation outside yourself, you protect your ego from discomfort. You preserve the image that you are capable but obstructed, talented but unrecognized, disciplined but unlucky. That narrative soothes you and weakens you. Jung understood something most men resist. The psyche will always choose a story that protects identity over a truth that demands transformation. If you are stuck, there are external variables. That's reality. But your leverage is internal. The moment you say, "This is happening because of them," you surrender leverage. You become reactive. You become emotionally entangled with forces you do not control. And high frequency is not about positivity. It is about control. Not control of the world, control of response. Most men do not lack opportunity. They lack containment. Cognitive control means you do not let every irritation become a narrative. You do not let every rejection become a conclusion about your worth. You do not let every delay become proof that you are behind. You observe, you adjust, you continue. Behavioral consistency means your standards do not fluctuate based on mood. You train when you said you would. You execute when you planned to. You follow through when it is inconvenient, not because you feel inspired, because you said you would. Emotional containment means you can feel anger without broadcasting it, feel envy without collapsing into it, feel doubt without obeying it. Containment is power. Without these three structures, collapse becomes decay. You isolate, but you don't build. You reflect, but you don't act. You detach, but you don't improve. Then you start resenting those who move forward. That resentment is a signal. It means you see movement and you are not moving. And instead of correcting your structure, you search for flaws in theirs. That is ego defense. If you want to vibrate higher, you must accept something brutal. No one is coming to reorganize you. No one is responsible for your internal order. Not your partner, not your boss, not your past. You are not a victim of your current structure. You are the architect of it. And if it is unstable, that is not an insult. It is information. Most men would rather protect pride than build discipline. They talk about sovereignty but cannot control their impulses. They talk about alignment but cannot maintain routine. They talk about standards but negotiate them under pressure. That contradiction lowers frequency more than trauma ever did. Here is the shift. Stop asking, why is this happening to me? Start asking, where am I undisciplined? Where do you overreact? Where do you over-explain? Where do you overconsume? Where do you underperform? Not emotionally, structurally. Because elevation is structural. Short, earned reminder. If this confronts you, stay. Don't scroll. This is the point where ego wants relief. In the next phase, we close the loop. You don't need more insight. You need subtraction with precision. And if you remove the right 5 anchors, your system reorganizes itself. But understand this clearly. If you refuse responsibility here, nothing that follows will work. Because without discipline, collapse does not become transformation. It becomes slow erosion. And erosion is silent. At the beginning, I told you that you don't need to raise your vibration. You need to admit you're stuck. Now you understand why. You were not stuck because you lacked knowledge. You were stuck because you were protecting structures that made elevation impossible. So we close the loop with precision. If you want to operate at a higher frequency, not perform it, not talk about it, but embody it, 5 things must be eliminated. First, eliminate the need to be seen as good. As long as you manage perception, you are not free. You are negotiating. You are filtering truth through approval. You are shrinking intensity to maintain comfort. Remove that. Let some people misunderstand you. Let some people call you selfish. Let some people feel uncomfortable around your boundaries. Integrity over image. Second, eliminate compulsive helping. If your value depends on being needed, you will surround yourself with people who stay broken. That keeps you necessary. It also keeps you small. Help when it is clean, when it is requested, when it does not cost your structure. But stop rescuing to feel significant. Significance built on dependency is fragile. Third, eliminate attachment to being understood. You waste enormous energy explaining yourself to people who are not equipped to comprehend you. That energy should be building your life. Say less. Do more. Let results speak. When you trust your own perception, Misunderstanding becomes irrelevant noise. Fourth, eliminate fantasy projection. See people as they are, not their potential, not their trauma, not who they could be. Reality is information. Fantasy is anesthesia. Make decisions based on what exists, not what you hope will exist. This alone will raise your frequency more than any ritual. Fifth, eliminate the identity of being wounded. Your past shaped you. It does not define you. If your personality is organized around what happened to you, you are still living in it. You are still orienting your choices around old pain. Integrate it, then move forward without introducing yourself through it. Scars are data. They are not identity. Now understand something critical. Each elimination feels like loss. When you drop the good persona, you lose approval. When you stop rescuing, you lose validation. When you stop explaining, you lose reassurance. When you drop fantasy, you lose hope. When you release wounded identity, you lose sympathy. That is the cost. And most men refuse to pay it. So they decorate their lives with practices and call it growth while keeping every anchor intact. You will not do that. Elevation is subtraction. Remove what distorts. Remove what dilutes. Remove what weakens structure. What must be built? Cognitive discipline, behavioral consistency, emotional containment, selective association, silent execution. What must be endured? Periods of isolation, misunderstanding, reduced social approval, the void between old identity and new structure. That void is not emptiness. It is recalibration. When you stop performing, stop rescuing, stop explaining, stop fantasizing, stop leading with wounds, something stabilizes. Your energy is no longer scattered across image management and emotional negotiation. It consolidates. That consolidation feels like power, not loud power, not aggressive power, contained power. And contained power is rare. Now the opening statement makes sense. You were not meant to add more. You were meant to remove what was never you. Vibrating higher is not about becoming spiritual. It is about becoming structurally coherent. One mind, one standard, one direction. If you are building this version of yourself deliberately, subscribe. Not because it feels good, because it demands discipline. And discipline, not inspiration, is what separates elevation from illusion.